Hi everyone, my name is Meenaa and I'll be doing a presentation on study methods, digital versus paper. So my gap is basically that as researchers and educators have adapted to technological devices, students might not prefer that and might prefer different study methods. So I wanted to research more about that. So I'll be going through terms and definitions throughout my whole presentation, an overview procedure of why I chose this method using some sources to back up my claim, and then analysis and sources, and then conclusion plus additional information. So what I mean by paper is like AP Barron's book or Princeton Review books or like textbooks or 5 subject notebooks. When I say digital, I mean just using Quizlet or AI to help you, and then hybrid is just both of them combined. So when I read this source, it was Paper versus Computer, the Great Essay Debate, I was debating which one was better than the other, because I was like, I think paper is better, but then I switched up to wait, no, I think digital is better. I kept ranking it up and changing my opinion, so I thought when I included that, a ranking in my method, I thought it would help the students to help them rank which one's better and how self-express themselves. And then the two middle sources, the Masterclass and McGill University, they were talking about the benefits and disadvantages of using digital study methods versus paper, and I thought if students had the right to express themselves on why they chose that certain method, I would get an insight into what they're seeing and what they're thinking of. The last source, it says that it highlights how digital writing changes cognitive processes, which kind of concludes my gap, because if they know that it changes their cognitive processes while you adapt to digital versus paper, why aren't they making a change? That was my whole issue. And so what is my method? My method just basically asks a simple question. For example, using math today, I actually did math, English, science, and history, the 4 main subjects, and took data based off of that. I just asked them the question, which methods do you use? But what I went through is that people might pick paper because they just like paper, or people might pick paper because that's what actually helped them. So this would give me an inaccurate data and skewed data as well. So I had to ask which method helps you learn that subject most effectively. So there's an actual response to it. And then the other option is just study groups, tutoring, or real life experiments, especially when it comes to science. So my goal was reach. I had 30 participants, and you might ask why I used 30. So according to the central limit theorem, if you have at least 30 participants, when you get a proportion from the sample and you multiply the numbers, you'll still get the same proportion, and it also reduces my margin of error as well. And some trends, I was scrolling through my Google Forms, I saw a lot of paper options that students chose. So here is my first question. I just asked them to rank their choices 1 through 4, 1 being the least used and 4 being the most used. So they could pick, I think paper is number 1, but digital number 2. And one thing about this is that with Google Forms, you can only pick 1 column per row. So you can't do paper and digital as both 1, you can only pick 1 number. And they can't submit the form unless they answered all of the questions. They can't just leave 1 blank and call it a day. So with this being said, I got quantitative data because by asking students to rank the methods from 1 to 4, I get the numerical data allowing how each method is used, and then I could figure out which one is more effective and which is ineffective by that. And then the follow-up question that I said, the follow-up question gives you a single choice per student, which I can tally up, and then I put into a bar graph, which I'll show later on. Then when it came to my qualitative data, I asked them which method helps you learn that subject most effectively. And the other option, they can explain, like I said, tutoring or real life experience, whatever they want. And then I explained why they chose that answer. And again, because you can see the red asterisk that's required to answer, so you have to answer it. And this gives me an insight into what they're thinking and why it works, so I can better analyze that and see if there's any similarities or differences from their learning preferences. So here you can see the science pie chart. I had to get the data, calculate it, and I also got the percentage on Google Forms. So you could tell that hybrid is the most from 36.67%, but although paper and digital are similar and equal, it doesn't surpass hybrid's number. For other, you could tell that, I think one person put tutoring from Dr. O. So, but you could also tell that it's a very uneven distributed graph. Here for the history pie chart, you could obviously tell that since lot of people didn't choose paper, but when I looked at hybrid, people did use paper, but they also used digital as well. So technically, does that mean like no one used paper at all? They used both. Some and other was also 0%, so no one really did study groups or tutoring for that. And the distribution shape, it's obviously uneven because a lot of people chose digital, which is because there was a lot of memorization on facts, so they used Quizlet. One of them actually said they used Quizlet for this. And then for the English pie chart, again, they used digital because of their vocab quizzes and all the facts you have to learn from a certain book. They used paper because I'm pretty sure in AP Lit you have to write essays, same thing with AP Lang as well. Hybrid, they used both. Again, other, there was not that much, and the distribution shape, obviously uneven again. And then math pie chart, it was very heavy on math because of the calculations that you have to do on paper, you can't really do them online. But they did put digital because they specified that they're using formulas and memorize the formulas that they had to apply in math. And then the other was study groups, and then the hybrid obviously was both. The distribution shape is biased towards, not biased, but more towards paper. So when it came to this, the data that I got was that a lot of people chose paper, 17 people chose paper, 8 people chose digital, 4 people chose hybrid, and 1 person chose other from the previous slide. And from this, I was just doing a little more research, and I figured out that from this graph, the internet usage and using just devices has increased. So as years go by, we're adapting to more internet usage and more devices, but from the graph before, they said paper was more used and they really like paper, which kind of supports my gap because as the internet usage is increasing, students still prefer paper, so is it really like doing anything? That's like my whole point. So here we have like the responses that I got and analyze them. So the blankness is just a teacher's name. I don't want to expose any of them. And then there are grammatical errors, but they were easy to find, so you know the exact word. So one response says, in this teacher, we would write a bunch of essays from the facts we have to remember, so Quizlet was good for that. Again, they used Quizlet. A lot of these responses actually did use Quizlet. And there was so much of DBQs to write. Practicing how to write on paper, each one helped me time myself during a test, but I have to remember the facts using Quizlet, so you could tell this person used a hybrid approach. Then for the science qualitative data, in bio, I had to use Know It. It's like a app where you could it's like Quizlet, but there's also AI involved as well, so it's like an all-in-one category app, and to understand certain processes. Then the hybrid one I had was I had to remember formulas for physics, so the method that helped me the most was Project Digital, but I used paper to practice my calculations, so these people definitely specified their thinking and processes. For English and AP Lang, we wrote a lot of thesis statements, so I practiced online and on paper. So again, this person used hybrid. And to remember information on my Shakespeare test, I used Quizlet. Again, I saw another trend of Quizlet. A lot of people kept saying Quizlets in their responses. For the math qualitative data, math is purely based on calculations, and there's no need for digital usage. They blatantly said that, and honestly, I agree too, because for math, you're usually using paper to do half of your calculations. And then I looked up on this graph using paper versus Quizlet. Since I saw a trend of so many people talking about Quizlet and just saying how it helped them, I decided to do more research on Quizlet as well. Here you can see that these are vocabulary gaining words, so these are just basic words, intermediate, advanced. Although digital does surpass paper for basic and intermediate, you could tell for the advanced version where you want your students to become smarter, they use advanced words, but they're using paper. So technically, this also supports my gap because the whole point was for them to adapt to digital devices, like how we went from paper SAT to digital SAT, but now people want to use paper for advanced words that also appear on the digital SAT, so I think they should consider using like paper methods and adapt to the students' personal preferences rather than saying, because the world's developing, we just have to let students depend on digital devices. So I found out what subject or method is popular, what method popular in general, like from that graph I showed before, and then the other methods to see any common approaches. Most of them were tutoring, none of them were study groups, and then I saw the insight into what they were thinking as well. So some additional information that kept me in check was a checklist, because I had, as I was going through my methodology and slides, I needed to make sure I was checking off everything. Then for the possible implication consequences, I had to only pick NBT students only because some students may not get funding than other schools, and I think having a control variable, like all of us having the same computers, is very helpful in my method. And the impact, the test will be adapted to students who, like students' personal preference and not the dependency of electronic devices. So these are my sources that I used. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice job. What might be the real-world implications or consequences to your local school?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so it's asking what may be the real-world implications or consequences to your local school?
Can you reword that, please?
Sure. So like, if, like here in the high school, right? What is, what's the benefit of using computers versus handwriting? Is there a benefit? I know you showed us like how many kids tend to use which one, you know, for whichever way, but what is the influence of, you know, the digital trend when we went from doing all paper to Chromebooks? What's the overall benefit then?
I think there are different categories to choose from, but especially from timing preferences, like when you're on a test, digital is very easy to use, especially for writing an essay online, versus writing it, people prefer digital, but then when it came to certain like subjects, they preferred certain methods. So honestly, my whole like spiel was to gather information on what they preferred.
So, what was one obstacle or like a challenge that you came across, that you encountered while implementing your research, and how did you address that challenge?
Let's see. One challenge I did have was definitely this one, because people picked like what they thought that they would like in the future rather than if it really helped them at this moment, or if they really actually got good grades because of this certain topic. So yeah, because I didn't want to skew my data or get inaccurate data because they liked a topic rather than if it actually worked effectively.
And how did you address that problem?
I just asked them which method helps you learn like that subject most effectively, and then I have them answer specifically why, and they can't, like I said before, like they have to answer that question before they move on to the next one.
If you had 3 more weeks to work on this research project, what additional information would you try to find to further support your gap in prior research?
I think by 3 more weeks, I would like find, because I saw a lot of trends on Quizlet, which was very common. So I think based off of that, I can pick a specific, like an app maybe that a lot of students use, and gather information on that, and try to interview them rather than looking at like survey approaches. And once I get like information from maybe what app they use the most, I can help me support like my digital, like why, like what they use for digital specifically.
Okay. Any other questions at all?
It's like, can you think of a problem when students rely mostly on technology to learn? And can you think of an instance where that has impeded learning?
Like were they dependent on,
Solely Chromebooks, technology, and it backfired.
definitely AI. Cause I think I tried testing if AI actually worked or not, and I already knew a question that I already knew like a long time ago. I asked on AI, and the calculations were really like off, and if they use that to study, digital might not be the way, so they probably use paper, or they probably like maybe use like study groups or tutoring, so yeah.
And also I'm getting at the reason why we're here now and not, a previous presentation, what happened?
Oh.
Right.
Yeah, I depended on like technology that just, it didn't really work, so.
Right. And in terms of a teacher, Mr. Keskler, or anyone presenting, right, the whole day is shot if you rely solely on
Yeah,
technology. You have to be able to adapt and overcome and, learn in different ways. So
yeah.
this is very good. Nice job.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if you know about this part of it, but teachers actually have to do training for a few hours every year about using technology.
Mhm.
So if there was a person that like basically taught teachers technology, it's like here's some things that you should do in your classroom, what would you say to that person based upon what you found here?
Honestly, I think I would just maybe add more criteria and more strictness to what they're saying. Because although teachers go through the training, there are students who, I've seen students go behind like teachers' back and maybe like cheat on exams. Like not, some teachers don't notice that, but like other students do. And honestly, I think teachers should like, I mean they're doing a good job. I'm not saying they're doing a bad job. It's just, I think like there are a lot of things to take care of, but one thing I would tell them is probably just to focus more on like restricting the usage of cheating, like using computers, because you can easily check that, or because like when it comes to like math calculations, most answers are online. They could just search that up, or like Mathway is a calculator too, so maybe like have them make up the equation so they can't really find it online, something like that.
So have the person who teaches the teachers work specifically with like the math department to kind of tailor a digital approach, or basically not work with the math and work with English instead? Like how would this person actually like go about their job of helping teachers with tech?
I think they should separate, like have each requirements for each subject. Doesn't have to be the 4 core subjects, it could be like for computer science too. Yeah, just like kind of separate themselves and have like specific rules for each one of them.
Okay.
This isn't really